The first breath tasted like a forge. Hot air, iron dust, incense that felt like knives in the nose. Logan rolled onto his side in a shallow crater and spat grit, blinking against a sky the color of a fresh wound. A hairline crack ran from horizon to horizon, leaking dull blue light. Somewhere far off, a bell tolled, so deep it seemed to vibrate the bones of his face. Figures massed along the lip of the crater. Giants in blue armor that gleamed like kiln-fired pottery, shoulder plates painted with wings and skulls, seals and parchment scabbed across their chests. Their helmets turned as one. Behind them came women in power armor etched with lilies and scripture, their flommers purring with patient fire. The smell of promethium trickled down to him, sweet and chemical. Logan pushed to his feet, slow, hands away from his body. I don't suppose anyone wants to tell me where I landed. One of the giants spoke through a vox filter, the sound like a cathedral door grinding shut. Identify. Logan, he said. Just Logan. Mutation evident, another said. Unknown origin. The woman who stepped forward moved with a soldier's economy. Her face was bare. A thin white scar traced her cheekbone like chalk. Canoness Seraphine Valois, she said. Her voice made the title sound heavy. You fell with the omen. That bell has tolled 3 times since dawn. Lucky me, Logan said. His ribs felt wrong, then felt right as the wrongness crawled back into place. He tried not to notice the speed with which the bruises faded. A new vibration stitched the sand under his boots. The crack in the sky twitched, widening by a hair. Heat shivered off the ground. The Flommer's pilot lights grew brighter, as if eager. Seraphine lifted a small swinging censer. Smoke bled out, greenish, clove and copper. Kneel. We test the flesh when the sky opens. You can test me standing, he said, and the impatience crept into his hands before he could stop it. Steel slid from the backs of his fists with the same old sound. Snicked. Helmets reoriented. Bolters flexed. The canoness didn't blink. Blades from the bone, she murmured. Close enough that he saw the hairline crack in the gemstone on her rosarius. A cruel birthright. Cruel's one word, he said. Useful's another. The bell tolled again, too fast this time to be comfort. The sand above them slithered and then burst as if something underneath had shrugged. A tide of wrong things poured over the rim and tumbled down the slope. Winged shapes like moths made of char, long-limbed lurchers with hands where elbows should be, faces painted in places that weren't faces. They smelled like a memory someone had set on fire. The giants stepped forward as one. The first ranks knelt. The second ranks raised their weapons. Bolters barked in churning rhythm, each report a muted thunderclap. Shells stitched the slope into bursts of black snow and peeling light. Sisters advanced between them, Flommers washing the knot creatures with sheets of white fire that didn't hiss so much as judge. Logan met the charge. He caught a leaper across its throat. The claws whispered through whatever counted as flesh here and came away smoking. Another came in low, all teeth and jointed prayer. He planted his heel on its shoulder, ripped the top half free, and let it spill past him down the sand. Hot pain punched through his side. Something with too many fingers had found a seam. The wound tightened, pulled together, left only a tacky warmth under his shirt. He shoved an elbow back without looking and felt bone crumple. He worked without thinking, the way he always did when the world went bright and small and honest. The Marines were a wall that kept moving. The sisters were torches with voices. Logan was the storm that found the cracks. The last of the lurchers wavered in the collapse of gunfire and firefire, then unraveled like wet paper in a furnace. The blue light from the rift throbbed once, twice, and drew back into a thin vein. Not gone. Resting. Silence pooled, except for the tick of cooling armor and the distant bell that would not decide whether to be mournful or hungry. Logan retracted the claws. He always listened for the sigh of metal going away, as if the sound proved he still had a choice about it. Seraphine offered him a canteen without taking her eyes off the sky. He drank. The water tasted like old stone and tin. You heal quickly, she said. Not accusation. Not quite. Been practicing, he said. A giant stepped up, helm folding back with a hiss of reverent air. His face was square and tired, his scalp a map of old cuts. "Brother Captain Aurelian," he said, "you fought with discipline." "I fought to stay alive," Logan said. "Discipline's a nice side effect." Aurelian's gaze lowered, and Logan had the odd sensation that the Marine was listening to his skeleton. "There is iron in your song. Lot of people have told me that. Never liked the tune." He could feel the suspicion in the way the line of sisters stood, in the way their fingers settled near triggers but not on them. He could also feel the gratitude none of them would say out loud in the way their boots had angled toward him during the fight, the way one had bumped her shoulder against his without meaning to when the line closed around him to keep the worst of it off his back. The sand at the crater's rim bucked again. Not a creature this time. A robed figure, rag-trimmed, stumbled to the edge and fell, hitting the slope and sliding with raw palms. A pilgrim, from the look of him, belt of icons, face crusted with road and devotion. "Please," he rasped, and his voice cracked like thin ice. "Sisters. Marines. The Ash Road camps." Seraphine waved a medic sister forward. The pilgrim fought the hands that gentled him. "They burn green," he said. His eyes found Logan, like iron shavings finding a magnet. "He said you would come. The man in the beak helm. The book with birds. He said the unkillable would come." Logan's jaw worked. "You saw a sorcerer." The pilgrim nodded, frantic. "He reads. And the birds fly out. They go into people. They sing inside their heads until there is no room left." A low chime bled into the bell, a second note under the first. The rift pulsed, a vein under bruised skin. Aurelian's helm resealed. The click sounded like a quiet decision. "We return to the Shrine Fortress," he said. "We regroup. We report to the Inquisition." Logan's eyes stayed on the pilgrim's red wrists. He could smell the places the rope had been. He could smell something else under that. Ozone, parchment scorched just enough to curl, the sweet bite of something that wanted to be holy and wasn't. "Who's your Inquisition going to see when they look at me?" he asked. "Exactly what I see now," Seraphine said. "A weapon looking for an oath." He almost said that he'd done oaths before and they had a way of turning into cages. But the pilgrim's stare wouldn't leave him, and the crack in the sky looked like a scar that refused to set. He remembered a boy in a different world with a fever and a gunshot and how far he'd run to make that not be the end of it. "I'll walk," he said. They moved out with the sun ricocheting off armor and eagles, a column of purposeful thunder marching through dunes that squeaked like old glass. The shrine fortress rose by degrees, a mouth full of broken teeth against the red horizon. Servo skulls drifted to meet them, sensors clinking, smoke writing prayers into the wind. Pilgrims knelt as the column passed, eyes flicking to Logan's bare forearms and away again as if worried they'd be caught looking too long at a storm. Inside, the nave swallowed sound. Banners breathed in a draft that smelled of wax and centuries, and the floor had a polish that could only come from knees. Logan felt small for the first time since waking, which took some doing. It wasn't the scale. It was the sincerity. He'd seen faith before. He'd even liked some of it. This faith had teeth. A man waited under a skull big enough to roof a chapel. He wore a long coat, pressed so straight it seemed made of rules. His hands were clean. His eyes were not. "Inquisitor Kestrel Vane," he said. "You're the stranger who fell out of the omen." "That what you're calling it?" Logan asked. "What do you call it?" Vane asked back. "Tuesday." It should have gotten a smile. It didn't. Vane's gaze drifted to Logan's knuckles, as if trying to see the metal through the skin. "Test him," he said to nobody and everybody. Robe-draped servitors rolled forward with needles-like gestures. Logan stood still and let the cold bite him. Blood-filled vials engraved with prayers to keep it from learning bad habits. Scrapes of bone came away as dust and clung to glass with static. The machines hummed like wasps wrapped in velvet. The Inquisitor studied readouts as if they were confessions. Logan clenched his teeth against the memories that rose with the needles. Stainless steel, white light, voices that called him specimen. He breathed through it. He stared at the hanging chains that held the nave chandeliers and counted the links until the counting settled his pulse. When the last needle sighed out, Vane didn't look triumphant or afraid. He looked interested. Resistant to taint, he said to Seraphine and Aurelian, eyes still on the data. Anomalous alloys bonded to the skeleton. Regenerative capacity beyond known baselines. He fell in a warp breach and did not deform. Lucky me, Logan said again, because it was either talk or start breaking things that weren't his. Vane turned those accountant eyes on him. Luck is a weak word men use for systems they haven't learned. You will serve until we understand what system you are. Logan rolled his shoulders. Serve who? The people who cannot serve themselves, Seraphine said before Vane could answer. He looked at her. The bell tolled. The crack in the sky shimmered in the heart of his vision even here, as if distance were a courtesy it had decided not to extend. Somewhere inside the fortress a choir began a hymn that rose and fell like a saw cutting through oak. Fine, he said. But I do it my way. Vane accepted that with a tilt of the head that acknowledged reality more than permission. Pilgrims vanish on the ash road. Reports of green fire. Whispers of a beaked man with a book. We send a spear squad at dawn. Logan could feel the line from that ugly sky wound to the ash road like a cord he might one day have to cut with his own hands. He looked at the canoness. She held his gaze like a challenge she hoped he'd meet. Dawn's too far, he said. People are burning now. Then we move now, Seraphine said, and her sisters were already checking canisters and seals, already turning prayers into fuel. Aurelian's helm sealed. The Marines reoriented with that silent grace that said every drill had smoothed down to reflex long ago. Vane stepped aside without an expression and without needing one. The column wheeled as the shrine fortress doors boomed open to the red night. Logan fell in without being told where to stand, his boots finding the beat of a war he hadn't chosen. The air outside tasted like cinnamon scorched black. The rift's light braided itself into the stars and made them look like they were staring back. He flexed his hands once. The scars across the knuckles went white and then relaxed. Somewhere out on the road were green flames and children with eyes like candlewicks and a man who read birds out of a book. Somewhere, the bell was counting down to something nobody here wanted to name yet. Logan breathed deep and followed the fire. The air outside the fortress was heavy and dry, as if the planet itself had forgotten what rain felt like. Logan walked alongside the armored sisters, their steps perfectly in rhythm, each movement guided by something deeper than training, a kind of faith that burned steady where other people's courage flickered. The sky above glowed with a faint, angry red, and the wound in it pulsed like a heartbeat. It made the horizon shimmer. The ash road began as cracked stone, then turned to dust and old bones, stretching into the distance like a scar that never healed. The squad moved fast, the massive figures of the Space Marines silent except for the hydraulic size of their armor. The sisters chanted prayers between breaths, words that sounded too old to belong to living throats. Logan didn't know what half of it meant, but he respected the sound of conviction when he heard it. He'd heard soldiers in 1,000 wars talk about duty. None of them sounded like this. Seraphine led from the front, her armor blackened in places by old flame scars, her steps unshaken even as the wind lifted waves of red dust around her. You've seen this kind of thing before, she said without looking back. I've seen worse, Logan muttered. Doesn't mean I got used to it. Worse than demons? She asked, as if testing whether the word itself would make him flinch. He gave a humorless laugh. Lady, I've fought devils that wore human faces. The ones with horns are easier. Seraphine didn't smile. Here, everything with a face is dangerous. The road led them to what had once been a caravan route, where half-buried wagons stood like bones jutting from the sand. Black smoke curled upward from a small hill ahead. Aurelian lifted a gauntlet hand, and the column halted with mechanical precision. Logan could hear the faint sound of chanting carried on the wind, a low, broken rhythm that made his skin crawl. Pilgrims, Seraphine said quietly. Or what's left of them. The Marines spread out, weapons up. Logan moved forward with Seraphine, crouching as they reached the base of the hill. The fire was green. It burned cold, its light making the world look like it had drowned underwater. Around it, figures swayed. Dozens of them. Skin pale as wax, eyes glowing faintly from within. Their mouths moved in unison with the chanting. It wasn't a prayer, it was mimicry, the hollow kind that repeated sounds without knowing what they meant. Logan felt something stir behind his ribs, the instinct that told him a fight wasn't coming. It had already begun. He stepped closer before anyone could stop him. A small shape broke from the group and stumbled forward. A child. A girl, maybe 10 years old, hair matted, hands clutching something shiny. Her lips were cracked but still moving, whispering the same words as the others. Logan's claws slid out without thought, a quiet warning. "Easy, kid," he said softly. "You don't want to come closer." The girl stopped. Her eyes flickered between yellow and white, like candles caught in a draft. She smiled too wide and opened her hand. Feathers drifted out. Black, oily feathers that shimmered with faint light before turning into ash madare. Seraphine's voice was a command, sharp and sudden. "Fall back. Warp corruption." Before he could react, the girl screamed, a high, inhuman sound that made the ground shake. The air twisted, and a shape tore itself out of her shadow, tall and wrong bones shifting under translucent skin. Logan lunged forward, catching it before it could reach the others. His claws tore through it, but it didn't bleed. It dissolved into smoke that stank of ink and rot. The child's body collapsed, empty, as if whatever had been inside her had taken the weight of life with it. Logan crouched beside her, his chest tight. She didn't have a chance. Seraphine stepped beside him, rosarius in hand, her voice calm but trembling at the edges. No one touched by the warp ever does. He looked at her, anger simmering under his breath. "That's a damn excuse, not an answer." The captain's voice came through the vox, cold and certain. "Contact north. Hostiles advancing." Logan rose before the order came. Shapes were moving over the dunes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Pilgrims and guards, their eyes glowing, their skin patterned with strange moving sigils. A tide of human shapes breaking into a run. The Marines formed a wall of ceramite and faith. Bolters thundered, cutting lines through the mob. The Sisters' Flammers roared to life, arcs of purifying fire painting the world in white. The smell of burning flesh and sanctified fuel mixed into something that made even Logan's lungs ache. He joined the line. There was no plan now, just survival. He moved where the gaps opened, faster than the armored warriors could react, his claws slashing through corrupted flesh and phantom light. Every time one of the warped fell, another took its place, their chants never breaking rhythm. A figure in a cracked helm appeared among them, tall and still, holding a book that moved as if it breathed. The pages fluttered on their own, and from them black shapes flew out, birds made of ink and light. Each bird that landed on a body crawled inside, and that body stood up again. Seraphine saw it too. "The sorcerer," she shouted. "He's using them." Logan didn't wait for an order. He sprinted through the smoke, bullets hissing past him. The sorcerer raised the book, and words spilled out like a song without sound. The air around him warped, heat and cold mixing in waves that made the ground melt like wax. Logan kept moving. He'd fought men who thought power made them untouchable. They always bled the same color. The claws struck. The sorcerer vanished in a flash of blue light, leaving the book behind, flapping and screeching like an animal. Logan pinned it under his boot and drove his claws through it. The thing screamed, 1,000 voices in one. It burned, not with fire but with light that didn't belong in this universe. When it was over, there was nothing left but ash and the faint smell of blood and ozone. The remaining corrupted fell silent and then crumbled, their flesh breaking apart like dry leaves. Logan stood in the middle of it, chest heaving, surrounded by smoke and ruin. Seraphine walked toward him, her armor scorched, her face unreadable beneath the ash. "You stopped him," she said. "For now," he answered, staring at where the sorcerer had vanished. "But he's not done with me." The captain approached, his armor dripping with black ichor. The rift widens. Whatever that thing was, it was only a shadow. The true sorcerer remains. Logan looked at the sky. The crack pulsed again, spreading thin blue veins across the horizon. He felt it in his bones, a pressure building, calling to something inside him he didn't want to answer. Seraphine lowered her weapon. Then this world's running out of time. Logan nodded slowly. So's he. When I find him, I'll make sure he stays gone. They gathered the survivors, few, silent, broken, and turned back toward the fortress. The ash road behind them was lined with smoldering bodies and the faint glow of green fire dying into dust. The bell tolled again, deeper this time, echoing across the wasteland like a warning from the sky itself. Logan didn't look back. He didn't need to. The sound would follow him no matter where he went. The night was restless. Even inside the fortress walls, the wind howled like something alive, dragging whispers through the cracks of the stone. Logan stood on a high balcony, watching the rift pulse in the distance. It didn't look like lightning. It looked like the wound of a god that refused to close. Every few seconds, the air rippled as if the planet itself was taking shallow breaths. He had seen battlefields die slower than this world. Behind him, heavy boots echoed against the floor. The sound was too even to be human. Brother Captain Aurelian stepped into the dim torchlight, armor glinting with faint blue reflections from the warp wound above. You have been standing here for hours, he said, voice a low, mechanical calm. Sleep is a weapon, not a luxury. Sleep doesn't help when the war's inside your head, Logan replied without turning. You ever get that feeling? Like the fight's watching you back. Aurelian stopped beside him, hands clasped behind his back. The enemy always watches. The difference is whether you stare back. Logan almost smiled at that. Yeah, guess that's one thing we got in common. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sky. Far below, the sisters' torch patrols moved across the courtyard in slow lines, their armor shining like candlelight. The bell hadn't tolled since the battle on the ash road, but its echoes still clung to the air, an invisible vibration that never truly stopped. Seraphine approached soon after, her steps soft but deliberate. She had removed her helm. Her hair was damp from sweat or rain that didn't exist anymore. The Inquisitor wants you, she said. He claims to have found something in the data from the book you destroyed. Logan looked over his shoulder. You mean the one that screamed when I killed it? Her gaze was steady. Yes. He believes it may lead us to the sorcerer. I was hoping you'd say that. He followed her through the fortress corridors, past stone walls carved with prayers and lit by candles that burned green at the tips. The scent of oil and old parchment filled the hall. A few sisters nodded as they passed, though their eyes never lingered on him long. To them, he was still something between a weapon and a curse that hadn't decided what side it stood on. The Inquisitor's chamber was filled with machines that breathed. Tubes ran from cogitators into glass vessels where fluids bubbled faintly, each labeled with sigils. Kestrel Vane stood at the center, reading from a hololith that projected moving text above a steel table. The projection showed shapes, circles, lines, the pattern of a map drawn by a madman. Logan recognized one part immediately. The rift. It pulsed at the center like a heart. You burned the book, Vane said without looking up. Yet it survived in a manner of speaking. I stabbed it, Logan replied. Usually that's enough. This one used you, the Inquisitor said, turning now. It recorded your blood when it tasted you. It marked your healing. The warp now knows your pattern. Logan frowned. Meaning what? Meaning the sorcerer, XY Arthal, can find you anywhere. Vane's eyes flicked to the map. And he will. Your body rejects the warp, resists corruption. To him, you are the key to immortality. Logan ran a hand through his hair, sighing. Figures. Wherever I go, someone wants to take me apart. Seraphine crossed her arms. Can we use that? If he hunts him, perhaps we let him. Vane nodded. Precisely. The warp energy around the rift reacts strongly to his presence. If we place him near it, XY Arthal will come. Logan glanced at the rift through the narrow window slit. It was brighter now, spilling threads of blue light across the clouds. He could feel its pull like a storm calling his bones. So I'm the bait. You are the weapon, Vane corrected. The difference is perspective. Logan gave a low, dry laugh. You really know how to make a guy feel special. The next day, the preparations began. The Marines loaded weapons and ammunition into transports, their movements a symphony of steel and prayer. The sisters anointed their armor with oil and scripture, their voices low and rhythmic. Logan stood apart from them, sharpening his claws on a jagged piece of metal. It wasn't necessary, his claws never dulled, but it gave him something to do while they whispered. Seraphine approached him as the sun bled red through the fortress gates. "You've fought many wars," she said quietly. "Why keep fighting?" He looked at her, eyes tired but alive. "Because someone has to." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's a reason." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, satisfied enough not to press further. "When the sorcerer comes, do not underestimate him. Faith cannot kill everything. Sometimes only will can. I've got plenty of that." When the transports took off, the engines roared like caged thunder. The rift loomed closer with every mile, until it filled the entire sky. The land below was scarred by light. Craters glowing faintly, rivers turned to glass. When they landed, the air shimmered with heat, and the horizon burned a color that didn't exist anywhere else. Logan stepped out first, the weight of it pressing against his skin like gravity gone wrong. His instincts screamed that nothing here wanted to stay still. They didn't have to wait long. The wind stopped. Every sound vanished, the hum of machinery, the crackle of torches, even the low chant of the sisters. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in their ears but behind their eyes, crawling through their skulls in words they couldn't remember but still understood. The ground split, and the sorcerer stepped through. He wore armor that looked like it had been grown rather than forged, dark blue and gold veins pulsing through it. His helm was shaped like a bird's skull, and his hands were wrapped in chains that moved as if alive. In one of them, he held another book, this one bound in metal that gleamed faintly with a heartbeat of its own. "Unkillable flesh," the voice said, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. A gift wasted on a man too small to see it. Logan stepped forward, claws unsheathing with a sound like thunder breaking bone. "You talk too much." The sorcerer spread his arms. "And you bleed too easily." The world convulsed. The rift flared, and a wave of blue energy hit the ground. The Marines staggered but held formation. Seraphine's voice cut through the static, shouting prayers that turned to fire. Logan ran straight through it. Every step burned. His skin peeled, healed, peeled again. He didn't stop. The claws met the sorcerer's armor, and the sound was like steel screaming. Sparks flew. The sorcerer countered with a gesture, and a flock of those same black birds exploded out of the book, slamming into Logan's chest. He hit the ground hard, gasping as the creatures burrowed into his skin, whispering inside his veins. He roared and tore them out with his own hands, blood hissing where it hit the sand. He got up, slower this time, but his eyes burned brighter. "You want my bones," he snarled. "Come and take 'em." They collided again, claws against warp-forged sorcery. Each strike bent light, each scream from the rift echoed in their bones. Aurelian charged into the fray, blades singing with energy, cutting down demons that spawned from the air itself. Seraphine's flames carved paths through the madness, her voice rising above it all, unshaken even as the ground cracked beneath them. Logan fought until his muscles trembled and his lungs filled with smoke, until his claws shattered the sorcerer's weapon and drove him back toward the rift. For a heartbeat, he saw fear behind that beaked mask. Then the sorcerer smiled, lifted his hand, and vanished into the wound in the sky, dragging the light with him. The world went silent again. The Marines regrouped, forming a perimeter, weapons still ready. The rift didn't close. It pulsed slower, like a beast that had gone back to sleep. Seraphine walked to Logan, her armor scorched, her voice soft. "You stopped him." He shook his head, breathing hard. "No. He just went home." "Then he'll come back," she said. Logan looked at the rift. It reflected in his eyes like fire in a storm. "Yeah," he whispered. "And when he does, I'll be waiting." The wind returned, carrying the smell of ash and ozone. Above them, the rift pulsed one last time, as if acknowledging a promise made between two monsters who couldn't die. They brought him back to the fortress under a sky that wouldn't heal, and the rift watched like an unblinking eye. Medici stuck him with needles and murmured litanies over the readings, measuring things they didn't have words for. Logan let them. He'd been on colder tables. The smell of incense and oil couldn't push out the memory of steel lamps and men who called him subject, but Seraphine stood at the doorway with her helm under one arm, and that steadied him more than he expected. When a servitor's drill whined too eager against bone, her voice cut across the chamber, not loud, just sure, enough. The drill stopped. Inquisitor Vane waited until the last vial clicked into its rack. The hololith hissed to life over the steel slab, lines and circles shimmering into a living map that made the air taste metallic. At its center pulsed a familiar wound-shaped knot. Around it, threads spiraled in patterns that tugged at Logan's eyes, like a song he almost recognized but couldn't place. The book recorded him, Vane said. When he destroyed it, he fed its memory of him back into the warp. Now the rift responds to his presence with measurable resonance. He draws the enemy. The enemy draws him. Story of my life, Logan muttered. Aurelian's armor murmured as he shifted. If we anchor him inside hexagrammic wards, can we invert the resonance? Lure the sorcerer into a fixed kill arc? We can try, Vane said. His gaze found Logan. You've served worse plans. Logan slid off the table and flexed his shoulders until old breaks settled. Usually without being told first. They led him not downward, as he expected, but up into the fortress spine, through galleries of saints who died making harder choices. The ward chamber was simple. Cold stone, rods of black iron at the angles, cable-fringed machines breathing a patient sigh. Symbols had been cut into the floor until the stone itself looked tired. The air at the room's heart felt thinner, not cooler, like something had been scooped out of it. He stood in the center and waited. A tech priest clacked through liturgies and the rods woke one by one, a faint hum that vibrated his sternum. Seraphine walked the perimeter, palm brushing each mark in silent inspection, then came to stand just inside the line, where the ward's pressure made hair lift against skin. Ready? She asked. No, Logan said. But I'll do it anyway. The machine choir rose. The hum resolved into a structure he could almost bite. The rift throbbed in answer, a pulse he felt in the sockets of his teeth. Something along the ward line fluttered. No sound, just a shift in the way the room sat on its foundations. The rune at his left foot twitched like a trapped moth. Hold, Seraphine said, already moving. That sigil is wrong. A robed adept at the far console kept chanting, hands steady. The wrongness sharpened. Logan smelled the faintest edge of ink burned too fast and hot copper. He didn't think. He broke the line, shoulder-checking Seraphine out of the circle as the leftmost iron rod screamed and spat blue fire. The ward inverted on itself like a snapped snare. Energy that should have caged a god knotted around Logan's ribs, trying to pin them in, trying to teach his bones a secret they didn't want. He roared and pushed against nothing. Claws blew clean through skin and drove into the floor, giving the hurt somewhere to go. The rod cracked. Light blew out the chamber door in a sheet. Sister voices hit it with prayer, firm as shields. Silence dropped so hard his ears rang. Smoke drifted. The rune under his boot was a smear of wrong geometry, as if a hand had come in after the mason and corrected the shape into something that obeyed a different book. Vane stood perfectly still. The adept at the console kept chanting, but his voice had slipped a fraction off from the others, a half-beat that made Logan's jaw grind. Seraphine was already there. Her gauntlet snapped the man's chin up. The hood fell back. His eyes were clear and human and terrified. Please, he whispered. I only traced what was delivered, canonus. A addendum from the librarian. I didn't. Logan inhaled. Under fear and oil and old will lay the sweet, dry smell from the ashroad fire, the same ink-metal tang from the birds that had crawled under his skin. Not possession. Contamination. The signature of someone else's hand moving his. Seraphine's jaw clenched. This fortress reads our orders with borrowed eyes. Vane's calm didn't move. Purify all auxiliary schematics. Burn the rest. He looked at Logan. Your healing factor reacted before the wards collapsed. It bled away the knot. Next time it might not, Logan said. His hands shook once, then stilled. The burns across his chest were already gone, leaving only a memory of heat. They quarantined the chamber and sealed 3 more like it. The day thinned to a smear of work. Marines took apart consoles down to the rivets. Sisters scraped and recut sigils, patient as surgeons. Servoskulls drifted in attendance with incense chains and recorders, their little lenses winking. Logan followed the smell of the contamination through corridors and up stairwells, like tracking a blood trail only he could see. Twice he found tiny corrections on stone, barely a curl of line altered, the smallest splice added, and twice he watched Seraphine grind them out and etch the original shape with a steady hand. She did not ask how he knew where to look. He did not ask why she trusted him to point. The rift changed that evening. Not wider. Closer. Its light softened from knife edge to something almost tender. A false dusk spread over the courtyard. The first time the bell tolled in that new light, Logan felt his heartbeat jump to meet it and then keep time without permission. He leaned his fists on a parapet and counted breaths until his pulse was his again. "You heard it," Seraphine said, stepping up beside him. "It tried to count me," he said. "Like I was a gear it could set. Can you keep it from doing that?" "I can try. Might need to punch the clock." She almost smiled, then didn't. "My first purge was a library," she said after a beat, looking not at him but at the sky, on a moon where the stacks were taller than churches. You could feel thought in the air, soft as dust. A page had been corrected there, too. Just one. The right word turned into a word that looked right until you sounded it, and then it bent you. We burned the wing. It still felt like breaking a promise. "You didn't write the promise," he said. "I kept it." She drew in a breath that steadied something invisible. "We keep it again." They were still on the wall when Aurelian joined them, helm off, features lit by the rift's false twilight. "Vox intercepts show a pattern of distress calls from the Pilgrim's Hospice," he said. "Too even. And the voice repeats under different names." "Playback," Logan said. Aurelian let the Vox speak in his palm. A woman cried for aid in the cracked calm way of someone trying not to bleed time. An old man begged for a confessor. A child whispered about a book with birds. Under them all, faint as breath under snow, was a rasp he knew better than his own. His voice, woven thin through the chorus, saying help over and over, a fraction behind each plea. The captain's gaze didn't flicker. A lure or a test? "Or both," Logan said. "Either way, we go." Vane met them in the gatehouse with a squad already formed. He didn't argue. He marked each of their foreheads with a dot of ash that smelled like iron filings. "If the hospice is taken, you cleanse it," he said. "If it is a snare, you spring it hard and fast and cut whatever hand holds the rope." They moved out under the counterfeit dusk. The hospice crouched at the city's edge, a long, low building built humble on purpose, its stones worn by hands and habits. Lanterns burned steady in the windows. The door stood open, a little too inviting, like a mouth that had learned to smile late. Logan went first. The entry smelled like boiled nettle and soap, and under that the wrong sweetness again, faint but present, like someone had spilled a bottle of perfume days ago and it was still insisting. Benches lined the hall. A dozen cots lay in rows beyond, linen folded tight, pillows square. No people. No noise but the tick of cooling metal behind the walls, as if the building had a nervous system. Seraphine traced the sign of the Aquila and led left. Aurelian took right with 2 Marines whose footfalls made the floor complain. Logan ghosted down the center aisle, senses flared. He heard wind fail against shutters that had been closed too well, heard a pipe somewhere choke and clear. When he put his palm to the wall, it was warmer than it should have been. He found the first page under a pillow on the 3rd cot, a thin square of parchment that looked like it had been copied in a hurry. Letters formed a circle that wasn't a circle, a pattern of birds breaking from a branch. He didn't touch it. He blew, gentle, and the ash of the ink lifted and moved as one, as if still a flock. It swirled, seeking his breath like it was looking for a nest. "Don't inhale," he said, and the joke landed heavy. Seraphine's voice from the side hall. "Chapel clear. No bodies. No blood." Aurelian. Kitchen clear. Kettles warm. Fire fed. The place is set like a stage, Logan said. And the scene waits for actors. The bell tolled from very close, not the great iron throat of the fortress, but a small one, delicate, like a handbell struck in a child's class. The sound opened a seam in the air. Logan's skin crawled. The rift's reflected dusk slid across the hospice floor and thickened, shadow going syrup slow. The warm wall with the hidden pipe sighed and exhaled a single moth. It was made of writing. Its wings beat dust that spelled his name wrong and almost right, over and over. Down, Logan said. Below us. They found the trapdoor under a carpet that had been cut and replaced so precisely the blade mark was the only clue. The hinge had been oiled recently. The ladder went into a well of breath that smelled like paper damp from a flood and dried too quickly. Seraphine went first without asking for the honor. Logan followed, and Aurelian after, the weight of his armor making the latter talk. The cellar was older than the hospice by centuries. Bricks laid by hands that had not imagined sorcery. Racks lined the walls, simple wood, the kind for wine or books or bones. This room held sheets of parchment pinned to the racks with neat iron nails. Each sheet carried a story that was not a story. Maps of veins, a rib cage mapped to a star chart, a handprint annotated with measures that did not exist. On the back wall, someone had sketched the rift in charcoal, and around it, small bells had been hung on threads of hair. The bells rang without wind. The sound crawled along Logan's spine and looked for purchase. He set his teeth, counted backwards from 10, and found his own heartbeat. Seraphine raised her flamer but didn't fire. Not here, not yet. This room would turn fire into a language it liked. A voice came out of the brick. Not from a mouth or a throat. From the mortar between the old stones. Little immortal, it said, almost fond. We finally built a room that fits you. Come say that where I can reach you, Logan said, stepping toward the wall. The beaked helm stepped out like it had been tucked between bricks all along. XY Arthal's armor drank the light again. His right hand held a knife shaped like a feather. His left hand was empty. No book. Logan asked. The sorcerer tilted his head. You brought one, he said. I borrowed your pages. The bells brightened, the pitch rising until the sound bit. The threads quivered, tugged by nothing. Something tightened around Logan's ribs, not a ward this time, not a line drawn to hold him, but an invitation written in the air that matched the scar under his skin where metal met meat. For a heartbeat, he tasted winter on a Canadian mountaintop and the copper of his own mouth and a woman's laugh in a room with red curtains, and all of it tried to knot itself into a story he would fit. He moved first. The claw was already in his hand before he knew he'd called it. Seraphine's trigger answered. Aurelian's blade came down with authority. The wall folded like a book shutting and the sorcerer wasn't there, but the bells kept ringing in the same little cruel voice. Up, Logan said. He's not fighting us down here. They climbed into a hospice that was no longer empty. The cots were occupied now by people lying so still they could have been painted. Their chests rose and fell. Their eyes were open. Each iris was written over with letters, not words, just the shapes, repeated until the human color had no room left. The small bell on the entry table swung without a hand on its handle. Seraphine's jaw set. This is a harvesting room. Aurelian's vox crackled. Outside, something screamed like a sheet of tin torn slow. The rift's false dusk deepened until it was almost kind. Logan didn't look at the sky. He looked at the door, where the light had taken on the faint shape of pages turning. He stepped forward and the bell stopped. Everything waited, as if the room had to hear what he would decide to be before it could move. He glanced at Seraphine and she met his eyes. He could read her choice. Burn it clean. Save who can be saved. Kill what can't. Keep moving. Do it, he said, and when she pulled the trigger the fire was white and without smoke, and for a breath the room smelled like rain before it smelled like the things it had to smell like. The letters in the patient's eyes ran like ink in a storm. Some blinked and sobbed. Some sighed and didn't breathe again. He did not look away from either kind. The bell chimed once more from the doorway. 2 notes this time, the second sharp enough to cut. Logan turned to see that the door wasn't a door anymore. It was a fold. On the other side, stone had been replaced by a horizon he didn't have a name for, colors the human eye grudgingly admitted and then regretted. In that distance, a citadel hung above ground like a thought that wouldn't land. Next time, the mortar voice said gently, "We'll talk where the walls like me better." Logan stepped toward the fold and felt Seraphine's hand on his elbow, not stopping him, just letting him know she knew where he was going. He stopped anyway. The fold closed with a soft sound, like a page turned in a big old book. He breathed once, twice. The hospice burned slow behind them in controlled tongues, the kind that cleansed. Outside, the false dusk frayed and the real night crept back around its edges. The bell in the fortress finally answered the little bell, a single deep toll that rolled over the city like an oath being sworn. "He's building something," Logan said, "using my healing like a pattern. Bells to count me, rooms to shape me." Seraphine wiped ash from the Aquila on her breastplate, leaving a dark thumbprint. "Then we cut his hands off." Aurelian looked up, visor reflecting the rift. "We go to him." Logan nodded. The taste of the fold was still on his tongue. "Yeah," he said. "We go to him." They went into the sky through a door that wasn't there until the rift decided it wanted one. Vane drew the sign of the Aquila over each of them and clipped a brass charm to Logan's vest, a saint's nail punched through a loop of wire. "If the fold closes on you," he said, "this will be the last thing the Vox hears. Make it worth the breath." Logan grunted and stepped through with Seraphine at his shoulder and Aurelian behind like certainty. The world on the other side had gravity only because it had decided to remember how. A citadel hung above rock that might have been a mountain or a knuckle, tethered to nothing by bridges that were more idea than stone. The air smelled like warm paper and thunderstorms. Letters drifted in lazy spirals, not words yet, just alphabet looking for somewhere to land. The citadel's walls were formed of book spines and bones pressed together until they forgot they'd ever been separate. They moved fast because doubt could accumulate here like dust. Marines kept formation with a discipline that bent the place into obeying physics where they stood. The sisters' hymn pressed the air smooth, a rolling pressure that flattened the worst of the shimmer. Logan ran point. The citadel pushed against his skin the way cold pushes against a cracked tooth. He tasted ink, and the taste tasted him back. The first bridge flexed underfoot like a page turning. Something stalked them in the margins. It never stepped fully into sight, just let its shadow fall a heartbeat ahead, a punctuation mark that kept moving. Twice Aurelian's blade met a shape that tried to be a sentence and reduced it to clauses. Twice Seraphine's fire made the drifting letters flash into birds and then into ash. Logan ignored the grammar of it and found the path that smelled like the sorcerer's arrogance. The gate of the inner keep was a ribcage with hinges. It opened when Logan touched it, not because it wanted to welcome him but because it wanted to prove a point. You cannot keep a book from the reader it was written for. The hall beyond was long and wrong. Shelves climbed into darkness. The shelves were made of spines. Some of the spines were too familiar. Logan tried not to see shapes that matched the slope of a human back. They found the first trap when the hymn faltered. The air above the flagstones thickened and came down like a net. Not rope. Writing. Thousands of thin black lines stitched themselves into a mesh and dropped. Marines raised pauldrons and shouldered it aside with brute refusal. It slid off ceramite like a rumor off a wall. The net wanted flesh. It found Logan and Seraphine. The letters burned where they touched skin and robe, threading themselves into seams. "Cut," Logan said, and cutting didn't work. The claws went through, but the net was a story about a net. Stories grew back when you didn't change the ending. He did the one thing his body had learned better than anyone taught it. He pulled the whole wound through himself. Pain bit and then blurred. The net tried to tally him. His healing untallied. The two forces rode across each other until the lines lost interest. Seraphine tore free on the same beat, Rosarius bright as a fistful of stars. A voice leaned in from the spines. "There's my letter." It was almost pleased. "You always escape the wrong way. It endears you." Aurelian led the Marines forward, but the hall broke into 3 halls and then none, and in the shuffle Logan and Seraphine were somewhere else. The hymn still hummed as a thin line behind the walls, and the captain's vox was a whisper that fell through cracks. "Hold position," Seraphine said, though they already were. Holding position in a corridor that might be a throat. Xyrthal waited in a chamber that pretended to be simple so the extravagance could hit harder. The floor was plain stone. The ceiling was a vault of stitched vellum, skin so thin light could dream through it. At the center stood a table that wasn't a table until you admitted it was an operating slab. Iron rings waited in the stone like patient mouths. "Little immortal," the sorcerer said, helm tilting, tone affectionate. "I would have sent a carriage, but you prefer the walk." Logan put himself between the thing and Seraphine and didn't bother with words. The claws were already out. Xyrthal's left hand held a quill carved from something that had learned to be a feather by watching birds too long. The right hand hovered over the slab like a preacher over a pulpit. "I will make this quick," he said, "because quickness is a mercy to those who come back." Seraphine fired. The white of her flame didn't bend. It struck true and didn't burn. It folded. The fire slipped into the quill's shadow and came out as a ribbon of handwriting that wrapped around Seraphine's wrist and tightened with hateful intimacy. She ground it against her rosarius and the ink sizzled, retreated like a scalded eel, but it had done its clever hurt. Her arm shook with the effort of keeping the prayer whole. Logan went through the middle. The quill met claws and skittered like flint. The shock made his teeth ache. Xyrthal moved like paper nose wind. No wait until it becomes weight. A sidestep, a gesture, and the floor learned it was a sentence. Punctuation marks rose like caltrops. Logan took a mark through the boot and kept going. Pain was an old song and he knew the chorus. He drove the sorcerer back across 3 paces of sacrilege and then hit the wall of something that was the air deciding it was glass. The slam drove breath out of him. Rings snapped shut around his wrists and ankles with the snide click of locks that had expected to win all along. Seraphine took a step to share his fate and the floor disagreed. A seam opened and swallowed her up to the thigh and then sealed, stone with a pulse. She wrenched once and almost broke her own knee to get out before the slab could decide how to finish the sentence. She stood with one leg bloodied and her flamer hanging dead. Sigils had melted across the nozzle like frost writ in reverse. Her lips moved. The words wouldn't. The room didn't allow language it didn't like. "Look at me," Xyrthal said softly, and Logan refused. Not because of pride. Because the sorcerer wanted to be important in his eyes and he refused that too. The quill touched his sternum and it wasn't a touch. It was a subtraction. Letters crawled out of his skin like splinters leaving, forming a pattern that resembled his ribs and didn't. The feather point scraped the adamantium and found a tone he felt in the roots of his teeth. The citadel leaned in, listening. "You are a refusal made of meat," the sorcerer murmured, delighted. "A negation that learned to hunt. Perfect for an anchor. Imagine a gate that heals the wound we make in it as it opens. Imagine a door that never learns to close." Heat rolled through Logan. The quill wrote on the metal under his flesh and the metal remembered. Every time his body tried to knit, the script borrowed the stitches. He felt his healing factor change shape under the pressure, not failing, but turning in on itself to keep from being used, like a hand closing around a blade and refusing to let go. Blood ran in slow, stubborn lines, thick as syrup, bright as an old red. Seraphine's voice finally forced its way into the room. Not a full prayer, 3 words, 1 word, no word, a breath shaped like a vow. She lifted her rosarius and pressed it into her own palm until skin gave and blood met the cracked gem and hissed. She smeared the mess along the nearest rune carved into the slab's edge. The rune shattered like glass struck in the right place. The room flinched. For a heartbeat, language lost its hold. Logan dragged one wrist against the ring until skin tore down to metal and the ring slipped. The free hand closed on the quill. It felt like grabbing iced wire. He pulled the sorcerer close by the weapon and drove his forehead into the beaked helm. Once, twice, until a hairline line skated across its polished lie. The third head but landed with the satisfying dull thonk of a crack threatening to be a fracture. Xyrthal slipped his grip like paper pulled from a nail and stepped back into the room as if the space were a cloak that fitted only him. Good, the sorcerer said, genuinely pleased. Keep resisting. I want the anchor to sing. The quill point drove in again, this time below the ribs, and wrote a character that wasn't a letter but a chord. Logan howled. The sound wasn't human for a breath and then was more than human the next. The quill drank some of it. The room drank the rest. Something far above answered like a bell struck under ash. Seraphine's eyes widened as the echo hit. Not an echo. A reply. She ripped the flamer's fuel line with her bare hand and flooded the air beside the slab. There was no spark and nothing to spark with, so she made one. Rosarius against ring, ring against quill, quill against the teeth of a man too stubborn to die. The snap leapt, and the world went white where she told it to. The fire that bloomed wasn't the citadel's. It was the fortress fire, the kind that remembered kitchens and pyres and walls kept through winter. It licked the writing off the rings and the rings off the slab and the slab off Logan's back. He fell sideways and rolled, dragging the quill with him because it had decided it was part of him now. XY Arthal's hand didn't fight the loss. The sorcerer simply made a new hand out of the air and flexed it like a pianist. We could have been compatriots, he said almost sadly. We both hate bad endings. Lucky for me, Logan said, coughing black that turned red that turned honest. I like the messy ones. Aurelian arrived like a door kicked in. He stepped through a wall that had been a wall and made it reconsider. Power sword humming in a register the citadel couldn't hum back. 2 Marines took the entry and turned it into a fact with overlapping fields of fire. The hymn returned, full-throated now that someone with a big enough voice had punched a hole for it. The chamber shook like a cough that had found something to bring up. XY Arthal bowed, half amusement, half calculation. The next page, he said to Logan, and stepped backward into a fold that tasted like cold tin and was gone. The room tried to keep them. The ceiling sagged like wet paper. The floor wrote itself into a slope that wanted them to slide back to the slab. Seraphine threw her ruined flamer like a spear and punctured whatever metaphor was holding the incline together. Aurelian lifted Logan under one arm without ceremony and without asking permission. The weight didn't matter next to the weight he carried daily. On your feet, brother, the captain said. You can be stubborn while moving. They made the corridor by standing where physics felt strong and walking only on those stones. The quill pulsed against Logan's palm in time with something that wasn't his heart. He considered dropping it and the idea crawled under his skin and scratched. He kept it. Some tools you use by carrying them until they hate you more than the enemy does. The last bridge gave them its worst idea of wind, and the sisters' hymn turned it aside. They crossed into honest air like breaking the surface after too long. The fold shut with a polite click behind them that made a few Marines check their teeth with their tongues, as if the sound had been inside the mouth. Back in the fortress, the Medicae wanted him on the table before the soot on his lungs had decided what color to be. Logan waved them off and they ignored him anyway. The burns along his chest and stomach were already scarring backward, healing out of sequence as if his body were reading the wrong line on purpose out of sheer contrariness. When the bandages stuck, the script had written itself into them before it faded, a ghost of letters that had the shape of bones. Seraphine sat on the neighboring cot with her ruined gauntlet in her lap and watched him without pretending she wasn't. What did he take? She asked. Nothing he can keep, Logan said. It was almost true. Under the words, something new hummed where the quill had bit deep, a tone he could feel in the scar where adamantium met spine. If he held still and listened, the rift answered. Not louder. Closer. He could hear it the way a blind man hears a river in a quiet city night. Not just where it was. Where it would be. A map written as a song played inside his bones. Vane appeared at the curtain like an annotation. You were gone 47 minutes, he said. Every clock in the fortress disagrees with that number by a different margin. I assume this means you were successful. We broke his table and stole his pen, Logan said. And he marked you in return, Vane replied, eyes flicking to the bandages and then to the quill still clenched in Logan's fist. Can you find him with that? Logan didn't want to answer. The truth sat in his throat like a coin he didn't want to spend. Yeah, he said finally. He tuned me. I can hear where he's tuning next. Seraphine leaned forward, knuckles white around the broken glove. Then we use it. We will, Vane said. He turned the brass charm at Logan's vest with 2 fingers, thoughtful. But understand the cost. If you can hear him, he can hear you. Bells ring both ways. Aurelian stood in the doorway with soot on his face in a pattern that had been holy once and was now just honest dirt. The rift changed while you were gone, he said. It moved. The Auspex paints a circle we don't want around St. Emilia. Logan slid off the cot, Medicae protesting someplace far away. He stood. The quill in his hand sang slightly higher, the pitch of a string drawn tighter. He could taste the ring the captain spoke of, a great mouth in the sky taking a breath it intended to hold. He's bringing the wound to the bell, Logan said. And he wants me to be the clapper. Seraphine rose, pain forgotten as purpose filled the space it had been using. Then we cut the rope and break the bell before he swings you. Logan rolled his shoulders and the bandages pulled and then learned to give. He flexed his hands. The claws came out slower than usual, as if listening for a signal only he could hear, and then found it and locked in. One problem at a time, he said, but the problem after the problem was already in the room. Somewhere above, stone stirred, and the fortress great bell tested its voice with a low, thoughtful note. The sound ran through the floor into his bones like a question he hadn't decided how to answer. He looked at Seraphine. She looked back, no prayer on her lips now, just a plan forming where faith had always stood. We end it at the bell, she said. Yeah, he answered, and the quill thrummed in his grip like agreement or warning, hard to say which. We end it at the bell. The fortress bell tested its voice again, a slow roll that licked the stone with sound. Each note walked through Logan's bones like a memory he didn't own, and the quill in his fist answered with a pinched little hum, as if trying to tune him to the bell's key. Medicae scowled and strapped bandages tighter. He tore them off and stood anyway. Seraphine had already traded her ruined gauntlet for a new one that didn't fit quite right and didn't slow her at all. Aurelian's orders fell in clean lines through the courtyard. Squads peeled off to walls, gates, roofs, shrine steps. Inquisitor Vane watched the sky and said nothing for a long time, which for him was the loudest kind of alarm. The rift wasn't larger. It was nearer, a storm walking on invisible legs. Its light crawled down spires and pooled in every metal bowl, in every polished reliquary, in the eyes of statues that had never meant to see. Pilgrims knelt in the nave until the sisters herded them down into crypts thick with old air. Servoskulls slowed in their patrols and turned to face the bell, sensor chains hanging still like the moment before a drop falls. You hear where it will stand, Vane said, coming up beside Logan without preamble. Not where it is. Where it intends. Logan nodded once. He could feel the circle Aurelian had described, a trembling ring of pressure encircling St. Emilia, as if the sky were shaping a throat to swallow. The bell above was its tooth. He wants to make me the clapper, Logan said. Use me to keep the wound open. Then we deny the shape, the Inquisitor said. We break the rhythm or change the rhyme. He flicked a glance at Seraphine. Canoness. We cut what can be cut, she answered. And if it cannot be cut, we burn what feeds it. The first scream reached them from the east wall, high and insectal, scraping over the teeth of every man present. Demons came out of the light like stains seeping through cloth, lurching things with the wrong number of elbows, winged shadows that had learned to be beaks. Bolters answered in disciplined chains. The sisters hymn rose, clean and simple, the sort of tune you can teach a child and ask her to hold while the world ends. Logan ran for the bell tower because the quill would not stop pointing. He went by rooftops and rain gutters, hands finding holds where none should have been, claws coming and going with quick little snicks to catch mortar. His boots finding the rhythm of the building the way an old thief knows the pitch of a lock. A demon with too many wrists dragged itself over a parapet and hissed in letters. He cut the sentence in half and kept moving. The bell tower's door had been barred from the inside with care. He put a shoulder into it and the bar creaked but held. A sister at his flank slapped a melted charge on the hinge without being asked. They stood aside. The blast rang the stairwell like a struck plate. Smoke coughed out. He went through. Inside, the spiral climbed and climbed, the steps old enough to remember other sieges. Halfway up, they found the first of the sacristans lying on his back, eyes open, hands folded neat on his belly. Someone had written on the whites of his eyes with a very fine pen. Lines, crescents, a tiny bell hung between two letters. Logan touched the man's throat and felt warmth and nothing else. Seraphine closed the lids with fingers that did not tremble. They climbed without speaking. The sound thickened as they rose, not louder, denser, as if air were learning to be bronze. The last landing led to a chamber of ropes and gears, beams polished by centuries of hands pulling in time. The bell itself hung above in the belfry like a sleeping animal, its mouth turned toward the city, its seed letters cast into the bronze so deeply they were almost wounds. The name of Saint Emilia, a prayer about vigilance, the year the bell first spoke. Men in robes stood around the wheel, hands on the ropes, eyes glazed. Their lips moved as if reciting. The same delicate little bell from the hospice hung from a nail in a beam, swinging without touch, counting without mercy. "Hold," Seraphine said, and the sisters behind her froze as if God had put his hand on their shoulders. Something about the room was almost right. The rope had been spliced with hair, hundreds of strands braided into the hemp, each strand darker than the last, each tied with a tiny scrap of parchment. The parchment smelled like holy oil. The hair smelled like fear. "Pilgrims," Logan said. "He's using their dead to make the pull sing." Seraphine's jaw squared. "We cut it." He raised the quill without thinking, as if it were a knife. The moment the nib got near the rope, it complemented the weave with a pleased little tremor that made his skin try to crawl off the bones. He pulled his hand back hard. "Not with this." "Your claws," one sister said, stepping forward. He shook his head. "If I cut it wrong, I'll finish his knot for him." Aurelian's voice came in harsh over the vox. "Western gate buckling. Reinforce or we lose the transept." "Go," Seraphine told two of her sisters. "Take the south stair. Tell them to hold the line on the Psalter steps and keep the hymn steady even if they have to sing it through their teeth." They ran. Logan stared up into the dark mouth of the bell. He could feel the rift shaping the air just beyond the tower's skin, pressing its face to the stone. The next toll would not be a warning. It would be an instruction. He could feel the instruction waiting. The quill sang like a tuning fork held too long. "Change the rhyme," Vane had said. Change the rhyme without letting XY Arthul choose the new words. He looked at the hymn board stacked near the rope. Carved patterns old choirmasters used to time the peal for feast days. Half-mythic arrangements with names like Angelus and Misericordia and Ashfall. He grabbed one at random and it burned his fingers. He grabbed another and it didn't. He checked the name. Emilius Mercy. 2 long strikes, 3 quick, 1 long. The old call for gathering the city. He held it up to Seraphine. "This one," he said. "Not his pattern." She nodded. "We pull on my count. We pull to call the living, not the wound. What if it listens to the wrong thing anyway?" Logan asked. "Then we make it listen," she said, and put both hands on the rope. He stepped into the circle with her. Close enough he could see the thin crack in the rosarius gem and the blood trapped under the skin of her palm where she'd pushed the prayer into it earlier. The robed ring of sacristans kept swaying, eyes glassy as marbles. He wanted to cut them free from their bodies just to be kind. He did not. He would not help the story along. They pulled. The bell rolled in its frame like a bear turning over. The clapper kissed bronze. The note swelled and bloomed, and for a heartbeat it sounded like every festival the city had ever seen. Then the rift's hand slid over the sound and made it say a different word. The quill screamed in a register only his teeth could hear. His skeleton rang. Again. They hauled until rope burned across callus, until the wheel banged stop to stop. The bell answered and the world outside answered back with a fanfare of blue. The rift flared. On the western wall, demons poured down in a sheet, and Marines stood in the gap with shoulders set and blades working like they were writing a psalm longhand. Logan felt the enemy's geometry buckle, then grip tighter, as if realizing someone had grabbed the steering wheel and was fighting for it. A figure stepped out of the sound and stood on the beam as if it were a polished floor. XY Arthul's beaked helm inclined, his hands empty. The rope wrapped Seraphine's forearm like a lover and tightened. The little bell on the nail clinked a single delighted note. "Almost right," the sorcerer said. "Let me help." He extended a finger. The hair woven into the hemp writhed, finding new knots. "There. Now when you pull, he pulls with you. When the bell says open, he will be the verb." Logan went at him and hit air that had learned to be crystal. He bounced hard enough to see two sorcerers. The one on the left smiled. The one on the right turned his head to watch Seraphine. "Canoness," Xyarthal said in that fond voice he used for people he enjoyed hurting. "The mercy you invoke is real. Let me show you its logic." Seraphine pulled anyway. The bell thundered. Aided or not, forced or not, it was still their pull. Outside, something tore like cloth across a stone. Fire rose on the Psalter steps, white and pure. Sisters sang with smoke in their throats. A Marine fell and the next Marine stepped into his place without breaking line. Logan reached for the wall where the air was hard and did the stupid thing. He let the claws go home and put his bare palm against it. The quill pressed into his other hand until his knuckles squealed. He felt the shape of the ward the sorcerer had drawn. No chalk, no blood, just insistence. He could not uninsist it. He could only be more stubborn. He pushed his refusal into the wall and held it there until his shoulder shook. The wall remembered how to be air. He fell through into the beam, caught with one hand, swung, and hit Xyarthal in the chest with both boots. Weight was a rumor in this place, but the rumor was persuasive. The sorcerer slid, taloned feet biting wood, feathers of metal brushing the nearest rope without touching and still managing to bruise it. Logan rolled to his feet on the beam and laughed because he couldn't help it. "You built a house out of books and forgot I don't read on command." "We'll fix that," Xyarthal said, and his hand filled with a new quill, this one made of shadow folded into something elegant and wrong. They fought like punctuation. The beam flexed under them. Each strike tried to make the other man into a claws. The quill cut air and left letters that tried to be bars. The claws cut letters and left air that tried to be wounds. Below, Seraphine barked counts through her teeth, and the sisters on the rope hauled in time. The bell called the city to itself one more time, and the city answered with the only thing it had left. It kept standing. Aurelian came up the stair like a verdict. He took one look at the rope and the hair and the trembling in Seraphine's arm and said without adornment, "Cut it." She glanced up at Logan once, and he nodded. She drew her sidearm and shot the splice at the knot where the hair went thickest. The rope didn't sever. It bled. Dark strands writhed, and from each parchment ribbon a whisper unrolled. The voices of the dead asking to be useful. Seraphine gritted her teeth and fired again, and then the third shot went through St. Emilius' name cast into the bronze at the bell's lip, and the bell shivered, angry in a way no metal should be. Logan felt the rift lean in to correct what they'd done. He did the other stupid thing. He jumped for the clapper. The fall was short and forever. He hit the iron tongue with his chest, and the impact spread through the adamantium like a ripple through a lake. The quill bit into his palm and anchored there, its nib kissing bronze. He felt his healing reach for the wound the vibration made, and instead of filling it, he told it to hold. "Don't fix. Carry. Carry this hurt like a note." "Now," he yelled, voice a scrape that almost wasn't voice. Seraphine hauled. The bell swung and struck his spine and his skull, and the quill and the iron and everything that was him said no in one long sound. Not a shout. A refusal turned into tone. It rolled out over the city and ate the edges of the rift's word. It made space, the way a held door makes a hallway out of chaos. Xyarthal staggered on the beam as if someone had pulled his name out of his chest. The shadow quill blew apart into a handful of ragged letters, and the letters tried to be birds, and the birds forgot how to fly and rained down like soot. Again, through a throat full of broken glass. Again. They pulled. The bell struck the refusal into the world a second time, and something cracked high above, like sugar hardened and then shattered. The blue light faltered. Demons that had been halfway through the wall turned and went back into the air they'd come from, sliding with sullen reluctance. The Marines on the transept steps took a step forward together. The sisters' hymn acquired a root they had not had before and dug it into the floor. Xyarthal's helm tilted. either in calculation or admiration. He looked down at Logan clinging to the clapper like a lunatic and said, quite gently, "You are learning to be a letter after all." Logan bared his teeth. "I'm learning to be a curse." The sorcerer bowed because he always made his cruelty look like courtesy, and then he stepped backward into a fold that didn't open so much as accept him. The fold closed with the soft, almost affectionate sound of a book you've read 100 times and will read again. The third pull wasn't planned in any book. Seraphine made it anyway. The bell spoke one last time. The refusal peaked, held, and then bent down slowly like a hand smoothing a child's hair. The rift stopped moving closer. It did not disappear. A ring of thin, sullen light hung above the city like a scar that had decided to remain visible out of spite. Logan slid off the clapper and hit wood, then stone, then rope, then the floor, where he stayed a long time because his healing was busy choosing between too many emergencies. Seraphine landed beside him in a controlled fall, then let herself lie back, breath soaring, helm rolling away in a slow circle and stopping against a beam. Aurelian stood with one palm on a post and listened to the noise of the city not dying. Vane arrived last because that was his art, to be exactly on time after the time had hurt. He looked up at the bell, at the hair spliced into rope, at the shot through St. Emilius cast name, at the man on the floor still bleeding in stubborn little trickles from old places and new. "We will argue about doctrine later," he said. "For now, well done." Logan coughed out something that might have been a laugh if it had had more blood left to carry it. "Later's fine," he said. "Right now, I can't hear you over my ribs." They got him down the tower on a stretcher that protested his weight like an old friend. The courtyard was a painting half-finished. Smoke and ash and the moving line where living held against what wanted them not to be. The sisters carried wounded to the crypts with the same efficiency they had carried fire to the walls. Marines stood while being bandaged because sitting would have been an admission they weren't ready to stand again. The bell's last refusal hung in the air thin as frost and melted slow. In the nave, beneath the ribs of the vault, they gave him water and cut away scorched cloth. The quill had fused to his palm for a time and then decided it hadn't. It lay now on the flagstones at his side, humming a little under its breath as if singing to itself. Seraphine sat on the steps and wrapped the hair from the rope in oilcloth, reverent as if the dead could feel the courtesy. Aurelian set his helm on the floor and wiped the soot from his face with the back of one hand, leaving clean lines like scars. "The ring holds," he reported. "It does not close. It waits." "It will call him back," Vane said. He looked at Logan when he said it, but he might have been looking at the rift. "And it will ask us a question first." Logan turned his head toward the door of the nave because something had changed out there, something quieter than the aftermath. The bell did not sound. The little bells did not chatter. The rift made no new noise. But the air had a weight like a cathedral full of people holding their breath at once. A pressure rolled through, not like lightning, not like pain, like a regard. He sat up too fast and the world went gray at the edges. He blinked it back in time to see the candle flames along the aisle bow as if in a wind that wasn't wind. Seraphine stood, helmet in hand, and for once she did not speak. Even Vane's mouth forgot its line of inquiry. Aurelian came to attention without meaning to. Discipline is a reflex and sometimes reverence is, too. The weight passed down the nave and stopped by Logan's stretcher. He felt nothing on his skin. He felt everything in the old place behind his chest where his worst hurts went to live. It was not a voice. It was not words. It was a question. He did not know how to answer, and he answered anyway, because that had always been his way. He lifted his good hand until the bandage tugged and then set it back down. He did not kneel. He did not stand. He breathed and kept breathing. The pressure lessened, not in disappointment, not in approval, in acknowledgement. Then it moved on, filling the crypts, the transept, the belfry, and finally the space beneath the rift, as if taking inventory. There was a faint smell of gold. The candles righted their little flames. The sisters exhaled as one. Vane remembered how to blink. Aurelian looked at Logan and did not try to hide the awe. "Did you?" "No," Logan said, which was also yes. He lay back and stared up at the painted ceiling where saints who had died of harder choices were looking down at him without judgment. But I think something old just looked back. The Inquisitor's face was unreadable and full. "Then we will be asked to justify you," he said almost gently. "All of us." Logan closed his eyes for a count of 10 and saw a beaked helm and a bronze bell and a ring of blue that had decided to wait. He opened them and found Seraphine's gaze, steady, unafraid. "Let them ask," he said. "I'll answer in the only language I know." Outside, the rift pulsed once, like a heart deciding to beat again. The bell above the city held its tongue. The night settled its ash. Somewhere beyond the towers, in a place that was not a place, Xyarthal turned a page and smiled. Dawn didn't come so much as the darkness thinned enough to pretend, a gray hush that let the smoke be seen where it had only been tasted. The ring of thin light above the city held, sulking, like a wound that knew it should scab and refused on principle. In the nave, where last night something old had walked without feet and asked without words, benches were dragged into a rough circle. Servitors brought lanterns and set them like little suns. The circle filled with armor and robes and ash-smudged faces trying to remember ceremony after a night that had burned most of it away. Inquisitor Vane stood with his hands clasped behind his back and spoke as if there were minutes to spend at leisure. "We are asked to justify him," he said, the pronoun clean as a cut, "by our oaths to one another, and to what sits upon Terra whether we see it or not. We will keep the language precise." Canoness Seraphine's armor had been polished only where it mattered, across the breastplate where she would set her palm for vows. Brother Captain Aurelian stood without helm, eyes clear in a face that wore yesterday like old weather. Logan sat on the lowest step of the altar with the quill on the stone beside his boot, humming to itself the way a mosquito does when it knows you can't swat it yet. He watched the light on the floor and let the voices move around him, a familiar trick from 100 briefings, listen without consenting. "He is warp-tuned," a senior sister said, the line of her mouth a plum rule, marked by the enemy, resonant with the rift, an anchor for their harm. "Resistant to corruption," Aurelian answered. He stood in the wound and said no, and the wound had to learn that word. "Useful," Vane said, "and therefore dangerous. The Ordo does not adopt artillery without asking who built it." Seraphine's gaze flicked to Logan and back. "He built himself," she said, and there was a quiet in the room that wasn't silence, made of men and women remembering nights when that was the only craft they'd had to hand. Logan stood when he felt the circle waiting for him and not before. "You got questions," he said, "not to be rude, to be efficient." "I got one answer, and it isn't pretty dressed. I don't kneel. I don't run. I stand where I'm needed and I cut what needs cutting. If your God has a problem with the way I hold a line, we can argue after." A little ripple moved through the lantern flames, a breath maybe, or something like a smile from very far away. Vane's eyes narrowed in a way that meant he'd noticed it too. "There is a right," he said. "One we keep for moments when our judgments need to be reminded they are small. We take the subject into St. Emilius Reliquary and let the question be asked where it may be heard." Seraphine nodded once. Aurelian inclined his head. Nobody else argued because nobody wanted to admit how much they wanted someone older than any of them to do the choosing. Logan picked up the quill. It thrummed like a tuning fork caught between two songs. The reliquary lay behind doors that had not been opened in 2 wars and a plague. They took the latches off like old armor, reverent, and the room breathed cold in their faces. Bones rested in glass like tidally folded regrets. A bell clapper hung from a chain dark with thumbprints. In the center, on a pedestal turned by centuries of kneeling feet, sat a palm-sized shard of metal the color of old sun. "A throne shard," Vane said without saying it. "You didn't put a name like that on a thing unless you could back it with more than story." Logan stepped up because they were all watching and because he'd spent a life doing stupid brave things first to save time. He did not reach out. He set the quill down on the pedestal first, a courtesy to the enemy. Then he touched the shard with 2 fingers the way you touch a stove you suspect is still hot. Heat didn't roll into him. Absence did. Not emptiness. Something like a hunger that wasn't cruel, a vast vacancy made of intention. A room big enough for all the oaths in the world to echo in. The question arrived, not as words, not as pressure, but as a mirror held up to a knife. What are you made for? Then I'll use it where it hates the taste, Logan said, and shoved the quill point first into the line of the mold where bronze would pour. The nib bit deep and stayed. He felt the rift through it like a drum through the soles of his feet. He felt the shape XYR meant to pour into the world. He could change it. Not with words. With will. Seraphine shoulder-checked a knotman into the pit, where it hit the dry floor and came apart into birds that couldn't fly. Aurelian carved a path up the stairs to the overseer's platform and held the high line because that was what he did. He put his body where the enemy most wanted to stand. Vane's voice ticked in the vox at the edge of hearing, counting off wards dying and wards holding, choosing where to bleed in the ledger of a living city. XYR raised both hands and the ring above the city answered. Light slid down through the dust like rain that had learned to cut. The molds steamed without wet. The letters soldered into the frame brightened until they were mouths. See? The sorcerer breathed, rapt as any sculptor. This is what immortality for a people looks like. A door that never rests. A bell that rings without end. Logan bore down on the quill with everything that was ugly and stubborn in him and felt the mold's shape waver. He could hold it. For a minute. For a heartbeat that never stopped. It would cost. That was the question laid plain at last, not by a relic or a priest but by the machine of a hateful mind. What will you pay to be what you say you are? He looked at Seraphine because you look at someone when you're about to let the world decide who you'll be, and she was already watching him with a kind of fierce, exhausted gentleness. She shook her head minutely. Not here. Not like this. Not alone. We go inside, she said sideways, as if discussing weather. He cannot be killed where the air still thinks it knows him. Aurelian cut down a creature that had gotten too close to the sister laying charges and didn't bother looking over his shoulder when he spoke. I will hold the door until you walk back through it. Vane's voice arrived with the sound of something failing and something else being born. There is a seam opening above the foundry, he said. A fold. It will not stay. If you mean to hunt him, you go now. Logan yanked the quill free. The mold shuddered as if relieved to be merely metal again and not a plan. XYR cocked his head, curious, for all the world like a man watching a dog work out how to open a latch. Bring your refusal, he said almost kindly. I've built alcoves for every part of it. Logan started for the stairs to the catwalk and Seraphine moved with him, stride unbroken despite a limp the night had earned. He reached without thinking and she slapped a strip of oilcloth into his palm, the same bundle of hair cut from the bell rope. A relic, she said. So the story knows which side you're on. He tied it around his wrist because it felt like a promise and because stubborn men sometimes need reminders tied where they can't ignore them. Aurelian reached his blade out as they passed and touched the flat of it to Logan's shoulder. No speech. The gesture said it all, a captain's benediction, a soldier's solidarity, the old language of men who plan to do a thing and then do it. They climbed. The seam in the air was just above the rafters, a thin blue that made the beams look like bone under wet skin. It smelled like tin and winter and the first breath after a near drowning. Logan stopped because the knave's memory had come back, the weight that was not weight, the question that did not demand. He felt it like a hand over his heart, not pressing, just there. You watching? He asked the empty space, which wasn't empty. The lantern flames at floor level bowed again, and the ring above the city tightened not like a noose but like a belt cinched before a run. Seraphine bowed her head for one heartbeat and then lifted it, unafraid. We'll bring your city back breathing, she said to the air and to anyone old enough to hear. Vane's voice was softer than it had any right to be in a place full of metal and war. If you come back wrong, he told Logan, because an inquisitor says the hard part out loud, I will end you quick. Logan grinned without humor. If I come back wrong, you won't get the chance. He looked at Seraphine one last time. She looked back, and whatever passed between them belonged to neither church nor army nor old gods, just to two people who had decided not to break if they could help it. Then he stepped into the fold, and the world took him like a page torn clean and set on the next chapter. The fold took shape around them like a breath held too long. Weight went sideways. Color stacked in thin laminations and then slid until it was a hallway the length of a thought. Floors forgot they were floors and remembered in time to catch a boot. Seraphine's hand found the rail of a bridge that hadn't been there and anchored it by deciding it should be. Logan kept moving because stillness here was permission. He held the quill like a bad idea he refused to let someone else use first. The strip of hair around his wrist ticked softly against his pulse, a tiny metronome keeping time with the dead. The citadel waited, not the one of spines and vellum, but its twin built closer to the wound. Sharper, impatient, overproud. Towers corkscrewed into letters. Bells hung from nerves. Stairwells were sentences you had to walk in the right tense or they threw you back. XY Arthal's presence bled through everything the way ink finds a seam in paper. He wanted to be read. The whole place tilted toward him like a congregation. "Make it pick us," Seraphine said under her breath, holding her rosarius like a lodestone. Logan nodded and stepped where the floor tried to become a category he didn't fit and kept not fitting it until the category gave up and became stone. They crossed a gallery of half-born bells turning in their harnesses. Each one had a word already cast into its bronze. Opening, 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 as if repetition could grind a reality into place. Logan reached up with the quill and scratched one letter the wrong way. The bell stalled, confused. Seraphine scraped her glove across another until the word turned into a smear that sounded less like a command and more like a question. The gallery slowed as if the room had forgotten why it was hurrying. The chamber at the center opened without doors. It was a rotunda with the sky for a ceiling, a sky that was all rift, blue written with veins, depth bending at its own convenience. The floor was a mosaic of names ground down to anonymity. In the middle, a frame hung from chains, a ring of letters soldered in a circle, still bright from the idea that had made them. Beneath it, a pit waited with the patient hunger of a bell mold. XY Arthal stood on the lip, in the light that wasn't light but the part of reality that glows when it thinks it's winning. He wore no helm now. His face was a suggestion the eye completed because it was tired of not understanding. When he smiled, it was with the whole architecture. "Refusal," he said, as if naming a pet. "You brought your priest." "She brought me," Logan said, and stepped past him into the light because the quickest way through a trap is often through. The ring turned. The letters warmed until they had breath. The chain above hummed with a note Logan could feel in his teeth. "You know the shape," XY Arthal said, almost fond. "A clapper that heals the breach as it opens. Not a door that never closes. A door that never needs to. Imagine the mercy. No more collapse. No more scabs torn open by panic. Only the infinite present of access. The Imperium should thank me." Seraphine didn't look at him. "Mercy without choice is a slower knife," she said, and the rosarius in her hand brightened to the color of a candle held cupped in a storm. Logan lifted the quill. The ring's letters peeled toward the nib like iron to a magnet, eager to be written again. "We're changing the word," he said. "You get to listen." The sorcerer's smile was courteous. "Change is the point. The difference is in who writes." The chains dropped without moving. The ring descended a handspan, and gravity in the room recalibrated around the decision. The mold gaped. The seam above the city tugged, and the foundries below started to warm as if stoked by hands that weren't there. Logan felt the city through the quill as if his bones were touching its streets. Marines bracing backs against doors. Sisters finishing a hymn on ragged breath and starting it again. Aurelian somewhere high holding a line because that was the geometry he'd been built for. XY Arthal lifted an empty hand and wrote with it. Not with ink. With insistence. Letters appeared along the ring in a script that had the same wrongness as a smile on the face of a man who can't feel his teeth. Seraphine stepped into the circle and spoke a prayer without sound. It walked into the metal and made space where the sorcerer had written certainty. The hair at Logan's wrist tightened once, as if the dead were being asked whether they had anything to add. He untied the strip and looped it over the ring like a ribbon over a sword hilt. "Name them," Seraphine said. He didn't say the long litany that would have broken him. He gave the small names he could carry without spilling. Men he'd drunk with and men he'd buried. Women whose hands had steadied him. A boy who thought being good meant making your hands into a wall. He gave the names to the hair and the hair to the ring, and the ring found that mercy is heavier than craft. The letters under it faltered in their neat, cruel shape. XY Arthal's head inclined. "Lovely," he said. "Let me show you the other half." The ceiling unzipped. Not open, something meaner. A row of bells upside down, throats pointed at the floor, clappers made of shadow, chimed in a falling progression. The sound did not move the air. It moved in tension. The ring steadied. The mold widened. The sorcerer's empty hand filled with a quill made of negative space. He wrote one line across the center of reality. Now. Logan stepped into the ring as it descended. He had made too many decisions with other men's breathing on the scales to pretend someone else could hold this one. The quill in his hand shook like something ready to break because breaking would mean release, and he didn't let it. He set the nib to the ring and, very simply, as if writing on the back of an envelope, put a slash through the word XY Arthal had cast. Everything screamed. Not with sound, with the effort of being forced to be honest. The ring's letters wriggled like fish pulled onto cold iron. The molds below tried to remember fire without fuel. The bells in the ceiling chimed, and the notes bent down into a shape that wasn't music and still terrified the part of the brain that learned songs before speech. Seraphine stood inside the ark with him and lifted the rosarius until the crack in its gem made a tiny star. "Hold," she said, not to him and not to the ring and not to the world. To herself. To the oath she wore like armor. Her shoulders trembled. Her voice didn't. The pull wanted Logan. It wanted the particular refusal his blood carried. It wanted his healing to be the pivot the ring turned on, a muscle that never tired, a wound that didn't mind being hurt forever because it called the hurt a job. He could give it. He could be a door that saved people by making choice irrelevant. It would make sense. It would be clean. It would be a lie. He remembered the reliquary shard and the question that had not demanded and how quiet it had felt to answer. He looked at the quill and saw his hand holding it and saw another hand in that same shape in a mirror that wasn't a mirror. A hand with a different gem on the back and a different oath in the bones and the same refusal. The pressure in the chamber shifted, the way a hall changes when someone old walks in. He didn't turn to look. He didn't kneel. He said the same answer again, in the only language he owned. To stand. To take the hit. To be the last thing between. The ring's letters lost their smugness. They were just metal with ideas stamped into them. Ideas can be changed. XY Arthal realized it a half-breath too late and lunged into the circle. The shadow quill in his right hand scribbled across Logan's chest, into and over the old scars where metal and meat met. The strokes tried to teach his healing to look outward. Logan caught the wrist, dragged the sorcerer close, and used his forehead again because there are tools more reliable than any magic ever named. The elegant, wrong face cracked like old porcelain. Black delight poured out and hissed on the ring. "You are a letter," XY Arthal whispered through a mouth full of nothing. "So sure of your shape." "I'm the hand," Logan said. "And I write the end." He jammed the quill he carried into the seam where the ring had been neatly soldered and twisted with all the rude leverage a body earns from surviving things it shouldn't. The solder finally remembered it had been liquid once. It gave. The ring split with a cry like bronze learning to speak in a new key. The chain jerked. The letters fell out of the circle like teeth from a bad dream. The bells in the ceiling tried to correct the mistake, chiming in a fast, insistent hand. Seraphine threw the rosarius at the highest one, and it went through with a shatter that made the sound decide it might be better off as silence. The hair on the ring lifted in a soft halo and then burned. Not with fire, with plain, stubborn disappearance, the way a rope ends when it has done its last work. The dead did not scream. They stopped helping. That was enough. The mold below shut like a mouth deciding not to bite. The seam above the city pinched to a slit and stayed there, humorless and empty of promise. XY Arthal staggered, holding his face together with dignity. "One ring," he said, teeth bared in something not like a smile. "One city. We can write other circles." "You can try," Logan said, and drove all 6 claws where the ribs should be. Inside was not flesh. Inside was a sheaf of pages bound too tight. He split them and the words ran off them like frightened fish. The sorcerer did not die. He thinned. He folded. He became a crease in the air that glinted and was gone, the way a paper cut vanishes after days and only stings when you find salt. The citadel groaned like a library, remembering it was also a ruin. The ring let go of its chains and fell at an angle that should have broken Logan. Seraphine grabbed a link and turned the fall, body and while making a lever of herself. The quill screamed, then went quiet like a knife put back in a drawer. The floor decided to be a floor again under their boots. The gateway back to the foundry opened with the weary reluctance of a door you've had to kick 3 times today already. They stood at the threshold until the building remembered to balance. Logan looked up into the ceiling that had been a sky that had been awound and listened. The ring above the real city held, sullen. Not gone. No longer walking closer. "He'll come again," he said. "He never stopped," Seraphine answered. "He just learned we can count too." They stepped back into heat and iron and the clean stink of everything honest that factories feel when men are working for something other than ruin. The foundry's noise hit like weather, human and ugly and full of life. Aurelian was still on the platform, because of course he was, armor smudged and blade dull with use. He looked down at them and for once allowed a smile that reached the unmarked parts of his face. Vane stood below at a trestle weighed with maps and relics and the tidy chaos of a mind that never stopped making lists. He did not smile. He nodded, which, from him, was a banner. "What cost?" he asked, because an inquisitor takes inventory even of miracles. Logan opened his left hand. The quill lay there quiet. The heel cut across his chest had closed slow, leaving a new line that didn't match the old map and never would. He flexed. His body answered, a half-beat behind the old rhythm, stubborn and intact and changed. His healing still came, but it walked where it used to run. He felt the ring in the sky the way a man feels the weather in old breaks. He could stand under it and keep it from sliding without being ground down to powder. If he left, it would sag. If he stayed, it would sulk and hold. "I can pin it," he said. "From here. Not forever. Not alone. But long enough for you to build wards that aren't written with other men's hands." Vane's mouth tightened, not in refusal. Calculating how to move an empire's worth of doctrine to make space for one man's geometry. "Sanctioned," he said finally, and the word was a stamp and a promise and a risk. "By necessity and witness. We will argue later." Aurelian came down the stairs and put a hand on Logan's shoulder with a weight that said brother more than any vow spoken. "We ring when you need relief," the captain said. "We ring when it leans. We ring when it is quiet, so it remembers we are watching." Seraphine leaned her helm against her hip and allowed herself the faintest curl at one corner of her mouth. "You'll hate the quiet," she said. "I already do," he said. "But I can stand it." They took him back to the bell tower because that was where the shape of the city's refusal lived now. The rope was new hemp spliced with plain blue ribbon instead of hair. The bell had a bullet mark through St. Emilius' name that nobody would ever polish out. The clapper had a dent where a man had once hung on it and taught it a word it hadn't known. Logan put his back to the pillar and let the sound of the city come up through stone into spine until it was a ground note only he could hear. The day turned like a page. Pilgrims came out of crypts into light that didn't lie. Sisters washed soot off the nave with buckets and worn rags. Marines cleaned blades shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, not needing to. Vane wrote 4 reports and then crossed out 3 lines hard enough to tear parchment and didn't fix the tears. The ring sulked above, a thin, ugly smile with no teeth. Near dusk, the weight came through the nave again, that absence that was a room big enough for an oath. It slowed, as if to see whether a stubborn animal kept its post when the wind changed. Logan didn't get up. He didn't bow. He kept being what he had said he was. The lanterns bent their flames in the old, strange wind and then straightened. Somewhere inside the old part of him that took gifts like insults and insults like fuel, something unclenched. Not forgiveness. Recognition. Seraphine came up the stair as the sun decided to pretend for an hour it could set in a decent color. She stood beside him, not facing him, both of them looking at the city that had learned it could be hurt and still be itself. "He'll write another circle," she said. "We'll write a better sentence," he answered. Short. Sharp. Easy to remember. We'll need a word for it. He thought about all the names he'd carried and lost, about bells and books and cities that refused to die because the people in them kept doing the rude work of standing. He thought about the boy who had told him the birds sang inside him until there was no room left. He kept his eyes on the ring and his hand on the pillar and said the only word that had ever felt like a home you could pick up and take into the worst places. No. The bell above them didn't speak. It didn't need to. The rift tightened down another shade, mean and slow, like a scab that hates the skin it heals and does it anyway. In the foundry district, the first hammer fell on a mold for something other than a weapon. Pipes, conduit, plates to shore up the walls. In the reliquary, the shard on its pedestal cooled from old sun to old gold. In the Inquisitor's ledger, a new column started with a single line: refusal, living. Post, St. Emilia. Function, to stand. Night came honest for once. Logan leaned his head back until the stone took some of the weight. He could feel XYR Thul like a paper cut you remember when you wash your hands, waiting in the fold, trying to work out how to draw a circle that didn't have to pass through a man who had decided he'd rather break than let it. He grinned at the dark as if it had insulted his mother. "Come on then," he said softly. "Read me again." The city breathed. The bell kept its tongue. The ring held, noisy in its quiet. On the stair, Seraphine sat with her helm in her lap and closed her eyes for the first time in 2 days and slept without flinching. Somewhere below, Aurelian's laugh startled a medic and then turned into a cough, and no one commented. Vane finished the line he was writing and let the ink pool at the period, an indulgence he would later deny. Logan watched the wound in the sky and felt it look back and chose, as always, to be the last thing between, and the choice settled over the city like weather that had decided for once to be kind.